We have Laurence Kotlikoff, professor of economics, Boston University, research associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research, president, Economic Security Planning, Inc., joining us today. We're honored to have him. And tomorrow and throughout next week, we're having the different economists on to get their different perspectives and views from this article. Because this is the best article I've read, putting it all in context from the scores of economists and federal regulators, former federal regulators we've had on, like Professor Black and many others here on the syndicated radio broadcast. But the article is McClatchy, a newspaper syndicated by Greg Gordon, How Goldman Secretly Bet on the U.S. Housing Crash. And the findings of the reporter, who's an award-winning reporter, formerly with the New York Times, is, and he got a lot of secret prospectuses and memorandums from Goldman Sachs that are quoted here. This is some explosive stuff, that they secretly bet against housing stocks, knowing they were going to go under, and that they wanted to do this in part for huge profits, but to also destroy Bear Stearns and competition. They had their key people in revolving doors in federal regulatory positions, from Treasury to the Federal Reserve, everywhere. So an inside job, and the article is just so important. I've been talking about it since 10 days ago when it came out, not this Sunday, but last Sunday. And quoted in here, Professor Kotlikoff says, the Securities and Exchange Commission should be very interested in any financial company that secretly decides a financial product is a loser and then goes out and actively markets the product, or a very similarly product to unsuspecting customers without disclosing its true opinion, said Laurence Kotlikoff, a Boston University economics professor who's proposed a massive overhaul of the nation's banks. This is fraud and should be prosecuted. Now he's saying in here, if this writer's research is correct, and from all the other people we've had on and the internal documents, it looks like it is. So it's great to have you on with us, Professor.
Yeah, the statement, this is fraud and should be prosecuted, I think I said if this turns out to be the case, it is fraud. I didn't say this is fraud. I wasn't referring to what they actually, I don't know for sure that Goldman actually violated any securities laws, and I don't know that they didn't. So that's all I can say.
You're saying if what Greg Gordon's saying at McClatchy, and this guy's got a great record, if what you're saying is true, and I don't think McClatchy would let him run with this if there wasn't a lot of where there's smoke, there's fire, but regardless, you're saying if this is true, it's fraud.
If what he alleges sounds like fraudulent behavior, I think, or at least some form of financial malfeasance. You just don't sell things to people that you don't where you're saying they're X and they're actually Y. That's one of the major problems associated with this entire financial debacle, which is we've had people selling snake oil and claiming that it was great for your health. Claiming it was penicillin when it's actually snake oil making people sick, financially speaking. So we need to have a brand new financial system. That's what I call for in I've got a book that it's coming out in March with Wiley called Jimmy Stewart is Dead. And it talks about how to fix the financial system from bottom up, very simply, which is to make all the financial companies, corporations, operate as pass-through mutual fund companies, just like Fidelity Investments or TICREF, the many large financial mutual fund companies. And those companies are the only part of the financial system that's still standing because they weren't borrowing money to engage in risky gambles and leave the taxpayer to pay the bill. So what they were doing is just intermediating. They were taking in money into their mutual funds and then buying the kinds of assets that those investors in the mutual funds wanted to hold. So that's the way we need to run our financial system, on the basis of mutual funds. And by the way, I'm not employed by any mutual fund company or anything like that. So this is just my own view. And many other economists are coming around to this view, and some top government officials in different countries are coming around to this view. So it's the way to really run our modern financial system without going back to 1930, which we can't return to. That's the reason the book says title is Jimmy Stewart is Dead, is that you can't go back to that kind of environment, and you're not going to have trustworthy bankers. We've seen that for sure. So you need to have a new system that makes sure that we can't be taken, that the public can't be taken for a ride.
Well, Larry, they can take your proposal or other similar proposals. And the problem is Goldman Sachs and other top investment groups and brokerage firms and investment banks have their people at every level in almost every regulatory position in government and quasi-government position. And so they can selectively enforce any rules they want. In fact, we're hearing about this new Bank of the World that'll have regulatory power and it'll knock heads to stop, these types of abuses. But the people that are going to be knocking the heads are a bunch of Goldman Sachs goons.
Well, let's not call them goons because we don't know. They're people just like we are. Let's not cast aspersions to these people. We don't know, and there's all kinds of. Wall Street it's a term that refers to not just that part of New York City, but all parts of the financial system worldwide. You've had people in Singapore bring down a Baring Bank, which was about a 400-year-old bank. There was a French rogue trader brought down Société Générale, almost destroyed the third largest bank in France. So this is a global problem, and it's true that the financial community isn't going to like what I have to say when they hear about it. On the other hand, they're not going to like what they're going to get hit with by the regulators, which is 90% cuts in salary in some cases, and the Fed is now, setting up plans to oversee compensation in different firms, probably including Goldman Sachs. So,
well, I want to go over that, but from your research, Professor, who are the bad guys? I mean, Bill Clinton got rid of Glass-Steagall. The Congress went along with it.
Well, there's a variety of problems here. There's basically a fundamental moral hazard problem here, where financial companies are playing poker with the taxpayers' chips. That's the fundamental problem here, which is that they're going to the casino with our money, and they're not. So there's that problem. There's the too big to fail problem. There's the fact that the companies are being run by the management, not by the shareholders, because the shareholders are dispersed. So there's a corporate governance problem. There's a fraud problem, which is that people left, right, and center were issuing mortgages and lying about the income and not verifying the collateral values. So, and liar mortgages should not exist, and they're going to continue. And there was the rating companies were in effect being effectively bribed by the people that they were paying for the ratings. You had the insurance industry.
Systemic fraud across the board. Let me just read you.
The whole system is basically corrupt, and I think that's a fair statement. And we have to come up with a system that's foolproof, that has firewalls, that doesn't permit the potential for systemic collapse like we've seen.
Well, how are a bunch of Goldman Sachs former executives and heads? I mean, Reuters had an article today pointing out almost everybody who isn't former Goldman Sachs in power positions over regulatory systems. I mean, it's hard to name a number one person, a number one man or woman in a power position who isn't Goldman Sachs or a former director. I mean, you go over the list, it just goes on and on. And I want to read to you, Professor, out of this article. It says, McClatchy inquiry found that Goldman Sachs bought and converted into high-yield bonds tens of thousands of mortgages from subprime lenders that became the subjects of FBI investigations into whether they misled borrowers or exaggerated applicants' incomes in justifying making hefty fines. It says, the piece together Goldman's role in the subprime meltdown, McClatchy reviewed hundreds of documents, SEC filings, copies of secret investment circulars, lawsuits, and interviewed numerous people familiar with the firm's activities. That they used offshore tax havens to shuffle the mortgage-backed securities to institutions worldwide, including European and Asian banks, often in secret deals run through the Cayman Islands and British territory of Caribbean, that companies used to bypass U.S. disclosure.
Okay, I get the point, but you got to realize that those statements, Greg's making statements that are general statements. They may be quite true. They may not be fully true. Who knows? But those statements can be made of virtually every major company that's gotten into trouble. They all had offshore operations. They were all engaged in one level or another in marketing securities whose underlying truths were not as disclosed. They weren't disclosing to fully. They may not have known themselves whether the statements on these mortgage applications were true or not. We know that the whole system did not work. I think we have to stop shelling out money to these big companies. I mean, what can we do now? We know what's happened. What can we do at the margin to fix things? Well,
okay.